Hey, Bruce, thank you. And hey, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for joining us this evening, or if you're viewing this after the fact, thank you for viewing it. And welcome to Shots with Soldiers, exactly a year after our very first Shots with Soldiers on the 9th of November, 2020. We did one, and here we are a year later now. We've done numerous episodes, and tonight we wanted to do just a special episode, do it very quickly, of Shots with Soldiers, immediately prior to Remembrance Day 2021. And I'm going to concentrate for a few minutes here on where that Remembrance Day and date and time came from, which is World War I, and just walk through World War I and the incredible Canadians and the Newfoundlanders at the time who fought during that war, who did what they believed was necessary for our nation and who stepped up. For those who've been with us before, you know what Shots with Soldiers is all about. We salute a soldier or soldiers, and we use the term Shots with Soldiers simply because during wartime, many times before soldiers went into action, they were given a shot of liquor or alcohol of some kind to warm their bodies, sometimes give them a little liquid courage and get them ready to go and do whatever mission they came. This became very common during particularly World War I, during trench warfare. And before soldiers went over the top, so to speak, they were often, almost always, in fact, offered a shot, usually of rum, often cheap rum, always cheap rum, but sometimes vile tasting rum. But most of them took that shot to perhaps warm them up and help them get through what lay ahead. Since we're going to talk about World War I tonight here in the next couple of minutes here, I'm going to just show you what I'm going to use for my shot. And I'm going to use Howitzer Whiskey. This is for my shot. The artillery, perhaps more so than in any other war, dominated the landscape and came of age. And Brigadier General McNaughton from Canada was one of the leading sort of tacticians and strategists on the use of artillery, and used that to enable Canada to win the battles that we were engaged in, and indeed to put Canada on the map. And because we are talking about World War I, my shot glass is a caribou to recognize the Newfoundlanders who fought, particularly at Beaumont Hamel, but in 5 other locations with major battles around northern France and Belgium during those 4 years. And so that's what I'm going to use for Shots with a Soldier here tonight. We're going to talk about World War I, which obviously started on the 4th of August, 1914. And Canada automatically was at war as soon as Great Britain declared war. We were in. We did not have a choice. During the war, our population was somewhere around 7 million people in the country. And out of those 7 million people, just think about this for a second, more than 700,000 joined the Canadian military. They joined the Army or joined the Royal Canadian Navy, and they served during the wartime. And out of that 700,000, just think of that, 700,000 out of a population of just 7 million. And out of those 700,000, more than 400,000 served overseas. What an incredible figure that was. And out of that 400 and something thousand that served overseas in the 4 Canadian divisions, in the brigades, or in the artillery, or in the supply, or in the Royal Flying Corps, or the Royal Canadian Air Force, out of all those soldiers who served overseas, over 66,000 of them paid for that service with their lives. 66,000 plus Canadians and Newfoundlanders, of course, who were not part of Canada at that time, paid for that service with their life in service to us. More than 175,000 of them were wounded. And these were only physical wounds. And you can but imagine that the numbers of soldiers who had mental trauma, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and occupational stress injury, and all those things that we've defined now, you can imagine, after being under artillery barrages, after fighting through the mud of Passchendaele, after being gassed during the Second Battle of Ypres, after being shot at and taking heavy losses, going up Vimy Ridge or Hill 70, or any of those things, you can imagine the number of those soldiers who were not only physically wounded, but also mentally wounded. Today we recognize it, then we did not. We know pretty well that the last Canadian soldier killed in World War I was Private George Price, and he was killed just outside of Mons at about 10:58 on the morning of 11 November 1918, killed by a German sniper. And you kind of have to ask yourself why. But George Price was killed. There's a plaque. He's buried not far away from that location. There's a plaque commemorating him as the last casualty for Canada in World War I. We typically have difficulty in defining who were the first Canadians to die in World War I, but probably on 1 November 1914, 4 midshipmen from the Royal Military College were part of HMS Good Hope, were fighting a German squadron off Chile during the Battle of Cornell, and all 4 of them were part of the 1,500 sailors killed when the German squadron actually won that fight. And those were midshipmen Cam, Hawthorne, Palmer, and Silver on the 1st of November 1914. And from that date until 11 November 1918, as I said, more than 66,000 soldiers gave up their lives, 175,000 who were wounded. And we had soldiers from every part of our nation, from the outports of Newfoundland to the forests of British Columbia, across the north, from the towns of Ontario and the farms of the prairie provinces and the towns of Quebec, and from the Maritimes themselves. And we had Canadians of every ethnicity, and we had Canadians from our First Nations who applied. And think about this also. The Indigenous who wanted to serve Canada in World War I had to fight to join the Army in order to be able to serve. And some 4,000 of them did. And thank goodness that they did, because they were the most incredible warriors. And guys like Francis Bagamagabo, who was the most incredible sniper with 378 confirmed kills and over 300 prisoners that he brought in to his credit. Henry Norwest, who was a leading divisional sniper with some 117 kills that had been confirmed before he himself was killed in August of 1918 by a German sniper that he was tracking and trying to take out. And we were, in fact, served so well by those individuals whose first battle, if you could believe it, was just to be able to join the Army so that they could go and fight. During World War I, we saw incredible heroism, much of which was never, ever recorded, much less recognized outside of perhaps individual rifle sections or platoons or companies or battalions. And we saw Victoria Crosses being won by a variety of individuals. Piper James Richardson, who won the Victoria Cross in 1916 at the Battle of the Somme in October of 1916. Piper Richardson, with the Seaford Islanders of Canada, got up when his company stalled and piped his company into action, marching up and down the parapet between the fire trenches and getting his company inspired, filling their blood with the lust to go out there and do the attack and cause that company to go forward and take their objectives. And several days later, he was helping bring the wounded back from that fight. He laid his pipes down on the ground, was out carrying the stretchers and bringing the wounded back, and he himself was killed, and his body was not identified till much later. His pipes disappeared. And somewhere in the 1990s, somebody who was in Scotland at a Scottish regiment saw the pipes and recognized by their tartan that these were Piper Richardson's pipes from the Seaford Islanders of Canada. He went back to Canada, raised money, went back to Scotland, bought the pipes, brought them back to Canada, and they now reside in the British Columbia legislature in Victoria, British Columbia. And so Piper Richardson, who inspired people to go. Sergeant Tommy Ricketts, I'm very proud to talk about this individual, Sergeant Tommy Ricketts from Middle Cove, Newfoundland, won the Victoria Cross on the 14th of October, 1918, during what was called the last 100 days campaign. He was fighting with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment in Belgium. 14 October, just tuck that in your mind and leap forward 88 years to 14 October 2006, when a young private named Jess Lorachelle was serving our nation with equal valor to Sergeant Tommy Ricketts and so many others. Tommy Ricketts was incredibly valorous that day in October. He prevented the Germans from being able to withdraw their field guns and machine guns and kill more Canadian soldiers or Newfoundland soldiers. He went back under fire and got Hamel, brought it forward, brought fire to bear on those weapons, took out 4 field guns, another field gun later on, and in fact got the advance going. He won the Victoria Cross for his actions on the 14th of October, 1918. He was 17 years old. Just think about that, imagine that. And 17 years old then, he had already been with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment and fighting for 2 years. He was in combat when he was 15 years old. Sergeant Tommy Ricketts from Middle Cove, Newfoundland. And we talk about the soldiers and the privates and the corporals and the sergeants lots of times about what incredible heroes they are, and how incredible they are and what awesome Canadians they are, and rightly so. But it was not only the privates and the corporals and the sergeants who were incredible heroes. And we've got guys like General Arthur Currie, who was the most incredible brigade commander and probably saved the Canadian division, as it was called then, during the Second Battle of Ypres, when the Germans unleashed their gas attack, the first time poison gas was used in warfare. And the French divisions to the left and right, the British divisions started to break. Some of the Canadian units were really just a half a step from breaking themselves. And Currie, with his solid leadership as a brigade commander, helped hold that line, helped the division hold that line. And the British Army commander said after, he said, I sensed all was lost. The divisions were breaking. The Germans were ready to break through. I could visualize them getting to the coast, cutting off the British Expeditionary Force, cutting off the Belgian forces, splitting the alliance of France and Britain, and the war would be over, he said. But the Canadians stood tall. And in huge part, it was because of the brigade commander, Arthur Currie, who then went on to become the division commander and was tasked by the corps commander to learn the lessons of the Second Battle of Ypres and learn the lessons of the Somme and apply them to the Army's training and organization, so that the Canadians would fight based on lessons learned, as opposed to fight knowing only what they did before the war started. He did that, got all 4 divisions, brigades, and the battalions in those divisions trained up. And those 4 divisions made up the corps under Lieutenant General Julian Byng to go up Vimy Ridge and do that incredible feat of arms on the 9th of April, 1917. Arthur Currie was an incredible and awesome Canadian whose courage enabled Canada to stand tall. And Lieutenant General Richard Turner, who won his Victoria Cross on the 7th of November, 1900 in Africa during the Second Boer War, an incredibly courageous individual. Somebody said he was brave as a lion. He was a brigade commander in the Canadian division during those gas attacks and helped hold that tide also. He didn't succeed as well as Currie did as a division commander, but when he went back to England to organize the resupply and the reinforcement of Canadian troops and the training and get it right, he turned that logistics and personnel pipeline into part of the success of the Canadian Corps for the rest of the war. Those were incredible individuals. And then we had guys like William Barker, a pilot extraordinaire out from Owen Sound, if I recall. And he was the guy credited with downing the Red Baron, Baron von Richthofen. And Billy Bishop, whose heroics were incredible and will go down in history as the only Victoria Cross to ever be awarded based on an event where there were no witnesses except for the individual who won the Victoria Cross. And it was his story that led to him being awarded the Victoria Cross. And Lieutenant Flowerdew from the Strathconas, who participated in what was probably the last cavalry charge that Canada will ever participate in, and because of his heroics during that time frame, won the Victoria Cross. Absolutely incredible. And the last one I would mention is Henry Norwest, again, incredible individual, a Métis out of Alberta, incredible sniper, showed everybody else how it could be done by slithering through the grass, by having incredible patience, by being a deadly shot and being able to get in position and observe for hours and indeed several days at a time before he took the shot, which was almost always effective. And as I mentioned earlier, he was the one who died in August of 1918. Those individuals, and more than 700,000 of them, all came together to form 1st Canadian Army, fought in Europe, fought in the skies over Europe, fought in the seas of the North Atlantic, and they went through that Second Battle of Ypres with the poison gas attacks. And many of them had their lungs burned for the rest of their lives. And individuals like Francis Pagamagaba could only sleep until he died in 1952. After that, he was gassed so badly, his lungs burnt so badly, he could only sleep when he was sitting up, otherwise he would have drowned. From there, they went into the Battle of the Somme with all of its horrendous fighting, and the number of casualties was something like 24,000 Canadians who were killed during that Battle of the Somme. And from there into preparation for and actually winning the battle at Vimy Ridge on the 9th of April, 1917. And from there into what was probably the most comprehensive fight for the Canadian Corps under a Canadian commander, General Mccrae now being the Corps commander, in August of 1917 at Hill 70, when they drew down the German forces and helped the rest of the British forces to break out in another area. And from there, they went to Passchendaele. Then the mud and the blood and the water and the coal and the terror and the death of Passchendaele. And that name, I think, still strikes terror almost into the hearts of people, or is synonymous with terror because of the horrible conditions that our soldiers encountered there. And Mccrae said, we'll do it if we're given the mission, but we'll do it the Canadian way, and we'll do it on our time scale. His army commander did not want that and said no. And Mccrae, with the moral courage that he had, defines him as an awesome Canadian. With the moral courage that he has, went over his army commander's head, something you simply didn't do in those days, went to Field Marshal Haig. Field Marshal Haig supported him, and Mccrae said, we'll do it the Canadian way, we'll do it on our timeline. And oh, by the way, it's going to cost us 15,000 casualties. He took the objectives, and yes, we had 15,000 casualties. And they fought right through the next year and included the 100 Days campaign, where they led the advance against probably 50% of the German forces on the Western Front. And they led the advance so quickly, with such imagination and such elan and such courage, that they kept throwing the German forces off their stride, getting behind them, cutting through on a flank, coming through with more forces, for example, at the Canal du Nord, coming through with more forces than the German expected, and overwhelming them, and simply driving a wedge in that helped lead to the capitulation and the armistice and Remembrance Day as we now know it. So tonight, without further ado, we're going to pay a tribute to, and we're going to raise a glass. It doesn't have to be alcoholic if you don't want to do that. And we're going to raise a glass to those 700,000 Canadians who helped make the symbol of the maple leaf, the symbol of the maple leaf, the symbol of our country, because of their actions during World War I. And they helped establish Canada as that sovereign, independent country. As I said earlier, when World War I started and Britain declared war, Canada was automatically in. We did not have a say. At the end of the war, because of their actions, because of what they had done, not what they had said, but what they had done, their credibility was so high, Canada's was so high, that we were viewed as an independent sovereign nation, and we were invited to be one of the signatories on the Treaty of Versailles. So to those 700,000 Canadians, in particular to the 66,000 who died serving us, the 175,000 wounded, to all of their families, we're going to raise a glass, and I ask you to join me. To our World War I veterans. We remember. Thank you.
All right, sir. Do you want to open it up to questions?
If we have any questions, I would be delighted.
Anybody have
I have a question off the top, if that's okay.
Go right ahead.
General, as a commander who's commanded in theater, what do you say to the troops before battle?
You know, number one, do your job, right? Number one, do your job. You're trained for it. You're prepared for it. You know, there's a reason that Willie McDonald is stripped and assembled, denies and stoppages, immediate actions and stoppages on a C8 weapon, or on the C6 or on the C9, if that's what he's carrying. Because in the middle of combat, when he's stressed out and focused on trying to stay alive and move forward, and his weapon jams, he's going to be able to strip and clear it and get it going again and get it brought back into action in just seconds without even thinking about it. He's prepared for that. She's prepared for that. Do your job. We depend upon you to do it, and you're prepared to do it, and you've got all the circumstances set for success. Secondly, depend upon your team. Depend upon your team. You know, there's a reason we train as fire teams and sections and platoons and companies and combat teams and battle groups. And there's a reason why we work through those training maneuvers time and time and time and time again. And there's a reason why we do after action reviews and talk about what went right and then what went wrong, and then reset and go through it all again. And there's a reason why, you know, we try and bring certain people along to be the tactical leaders and then strategic leaders, because we think they've got those lessons down pat and they're ready to go. So rely upon your team, look to your team, and you support them by doing your job, and rely upon them that they're going to do their job, and then support you. And just remember, number one, do your job. Number two, be part of that team. And number three, go out there and do it with the values that you believe. And remember, a sergeant major, and I do believe that's a fundamental part of what you do. We do everything what we do with the values that we bring and that we hold near and dear as a group, as the Canadian Forces. And remember, one of our sergeant majors asked by Prime Minister Paul Martin at the time. The three of us were sitting in the House, in the Parliament buildings, and he said, I said, hey, the sergeant major is a recruiter here, Prime Minister, one of our very best. And so I said, what kind of people are you looking for to be soldiers? And Sergeant Major said, we want people with good Canadian values. If we got that, we'll make soldiers out of them. No doubt there. We'll make them fit, and we'll train them well, and we'll fire them up and make them part of a team. But we need to have that basis of good values. And I think those three things are what I talked about. And I would always end up by saying, look, I'm your commander. I'm the Chief of Defense Staff. I've got your back. And I'll go to hell's doorstep in support of you to make sure you've got what you need to do the job if you already don't, or that the conditions are set. And that's my part of the fight. And that's what I was going to do. So that's pretty much what I would say. And I would usually throw in a joke about the Leafs and sometimes tell a joke about Newfoundlanders because, hey, I have one. But those are the kind of things that I would talk about.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, we have a question on our Facebook feed. It's from Matt Hutby. He wants to know if we will see your charity golf tournament again in 2022.
Not sure, because it's a great cause. We want to raise money to support our veterans and their families. And so hopefully, yes, we will. But as you know, 2020, 2019, or 2020, 2021 has been tough on those kind of tournaments. And so we want to do it. Yeah, we want to continue, keep the profile of our men and women serving and their families high, and get Canadians to recognize just what an incredible group of people we have and those sons and daughters. And then we want to raise some money and get people on side to support them in the things that we need to provide for our veterans and their families that are not provided by the government of Canada. And that's not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong here. That's not a bad thing. I think the idea of our private citizens and our corporations providing certain part of that support to our veterans and our families and our soldiers, serving soldiers and their families, is a really good thing. That's engagement in a country to support your sons and daughters who are serving us. So hopefully, yes, fingers crossed.
We have another question from Gabby. She's here in the
Hi, Gabby.
Hi, how are you, General Hillier? I acquired my care and concern for our veterans after my grade 9 English class, which was all about history class, which was all about World War I. So much of what you talked about already struck a very familiar chord with me. And the thing that struck me most as a 13-year-old were the letters from home that were in the start of each chapter about each battle. And interesting to note that nowhere in your discussion about World War I was anything about John Mccrae and in Flanders Field. So because there were so many letters from home that were written over the years. Did you write letters from home letters to home while you were overseas? Did you write letters from the front?
Oh, absolutely. So look, I'm going to date myself here. I apologize. When I first deployed, my wife and I wrote each other every single day. We had no phone, no internet, no Wi-Fi, etc. And truthfully, we numbered our letters. Can you believe that? We numbered our letters, just like was done in World War II and World War I. And that way I'd get 6 letters at a time and get none for 2 weeks or whatever. And I would know kind of which ones to read in what order. So yeah, I wrote letters from home. In fact, my son put them all together in a little booklet for me when I came home that I had written to my wife and she to me every single day we were deployed, unless there really was an anomaly. So yeah, I didn't talk about John Mccrae because I think John Mccrae obviously gets such incredible coverage and respect and including from me, and having stood in Belgium, at the spot where John Mccrae came out for a break after losing his best friend in the surgical unit there, and wrote that poem. And every time I go there with a group of people, I get them all together at that little cairn where the brass plaque is with the poem on it, and we all recite it together. I won't let anybody go until we've already all done that, and it's always really emotional to go there. And in that cemetery, and these are people who served. They're not all Canadians, obviously. In fact, most of them in that cemetery are not, if you've been there. But there is, I think, the youngest boy that was killed in World War I in the Allied forces, who was 15 years old. He's buried there. And the path to his grave is so worn that the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery had to put in artificial lawn or grass there specifically from the entrance down the pathway to his headstone, because so many people go there. It's quite incredible to watch. John Mccrae obviously represents us all well as a Canadian, as he did, and that poem resonates everywhere.
I did not know that he wrote it after the passing of his.
He was. The story is that he was out sitting. He was exhausted. He was battle fatigued. He was stressed, and he went out and sat. And right there by that cemetery is a small hill. I don't know if that was there then, because it's right on the side of the canal where it is, and they were dug into the banks of the canal, and there were all kinds of poppies in April of that year, and there's still all kinds of poppies that grow there wild, and that's where he wrote it when he was in a low point in his life, for sure.
I knew about that part of the story. I just didn't realize about his best friend. It gives me a whole different perspective on having stood honor guard at the Toronto end of the Highway Heroes, and the final task for that best friend being to go thank the honor guard. That's a much more powerful perspective even than it was already. Thank you for that.
And Gabby, if I could encourage you, and so listen, you're talking to students, and sometimes right now it's really tough to get people interested. Okay, World War I, who cares? If you ever have 90 minutes, you got nothing else to do, go on and find that documentary called Forged in Stone, which I was a part of getting made. And we talk about why that was important, and about the credibility that Canada gained through World War I, the confidence that we had when those 400,000 people came back to Canada that they could do anything. How they understood that differences were actually a positive thing, and how crucial it was to build teams to run the country, and how they came back, every single one of them, a leader. And those are very real things today that we need in our country. We need leadership, and we need confidence on the world stage that comes from action, not from just words. And we need credibility when we do things with our allies and with those who perhaps would be threats to our nation. And all of those things give us our place in the world and give us a strong country. And I think those come directly from World War I in a way that we really couldn't imagine anymore. I think those things are important to study and talk about, because unless you tend a country keeping those things in mind, it can disappear on you. Enough said. I preached long enough now. Sorry.
So I think that's great, sir. That will conclude our episode today. We just wanted to give a little bit of an update. Our petition E3636 in the House of Commons is just past the 6,000 mark, and we encourage everyone to go and sign it if they haven't signed it already. And please share it. Get it out there to as many people as possible. Ask your mom, ask your dad, ask your brother, ask your sister, ask everybody that you know to sign it. And did you have any concluding words, sir, that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I do, Bruce, and thank you for that. And folks, I had the opportunity on Friday to spend about 3.5 hours with Jess Lorachelle up in North Bay. And if I thought that probably he deserves the Victoria Cross, and that we really as a nation need to relook how we recognized him, and therefore everybody else in the Canadian Forces doing things. Any small doubt that I might have had was dissipated on Friday. And just talking to that beautiful young man, that son of Canada, I love him dearly. been a long time since I've seen him. He's gone through some really, really tough times. And you know, there's no bravado in him. There's no bravado in him. He's just a soft-spoken young guy. And it was kind of funny. I said to him at the end of the 3.5 hours, I said, look, you're aware, right, of valor in the presence of the enemy and what our initiative entails. It means that we're trying to get your citation reviewed and get the extra richness of detail brought in that perhaps wasn't as clear or wasn't there at all before, and ask for an assessment that will, we hope, lead to you getting the award the Victoria Cross. And he said, you know, if that happens, he would be humbled, and that would be rewarding people or recognizing people that served with him around there. But he said, you know, it's kind of funny. He said, in an observation post, our tactics are that we don't defend an observation post. You know, if there's an individual or several individuals there, your job is to spot the enemy coming in, alert the main position, and then immediately get your ass back there and be ready to fight from the main defensive position. So he said, I didn't abandon that observation post. I actually thought I was going to be in shit. And I thought I was going to be in trouble at the end of it. And he said, here we are talking about maybe, you know, I got a star of military valor, he said, and, you know, maybe it might even change. And so it was kind of funny to watch, to listen to him talk. And, you know, just chatting to him. Hey, they pull into that position on the 14th of October at Strong Point Center. And we got Willie McDonald on here, and all you guys know that Willie is a Star of Military Valor winner, and he knows where Strong Point Center is and that piece of ground and the enemy, and a great Canadian hero right there. And their platoon rolled in. They're down this section to start with. They've got the intelligence coming that they're going to get hit, and they're going to get hit very soon and by a fairly big force. Master Corporal Jeremy LeBlanc, who was on one of our Shots with Soldiers just a couple of weeks ago, was a section second in command for Jess's section. He said, we got to put somebody in the observation post. I can only afford to put one person up there. I don't want to designate anybody because it's going to be a rough job. Would somebody volunteer, or is there a volunteer? And Jess stuck his arm up, went into the observation post, almost immediately got hit. And in the first part of the getting hit as a platoon in Strong Point Center, got hit by that rocket propelled grenade. He slammed back against the edge of the 3 foot thick mud and wattle and straw wall that's been baked into the desert sun there for 1,000 years. It's like steel. His neck has got vertebrae shattered. His back has got vertebrae shattered. He's firing rocket launchers. He's bleeding from the ear. His retina is detached, and we don't know it for a long period, but his frontal lobe has been damaged, and that affects his memory somewhat. And he opens up with the C6 machine gun, fires down till he's got about 100 rounds left, but he wants to keep that for a last ditch fight. He grabs the M72s and starts cranking those out. He's being attacked by what he can see from his spot, about 40 Taliban fighters, and he's zinging those M72s directly at individual Taliban fighters and literally taking them out one after the other. They're all sort of 200 yards, some of them at 400 yards, slinging fire at him the whole time. And he's doing all of that until he gets down to 2 M72s. The attack abates just a little tiny bit. Lieutenant Corby comes into his OP and says, hey, give me some covering fire. I want to come in. And Ray Corby said after, I thought that Jess was dead. I didn't think anybody was alive in that observation post. It was so utterly shattered. He got in there and they talked through it. And he said, okay, I'll replace you here. And Jess said, no, let's not impose this on somebody else here. I've been through it and I'll stay. And so he stayed on for the rest of the fight. And then he got joined by one of his soldiers, and I apologize that I don't have his name right at the tip of my tongue, plus Warrant Officer Robertson, the platoon warrant officer, and they stayed with him throughout the rest of the night. So all three of them spent the night in the observation post. And then the next day, they got relieved by another platoon. Jess ended up back in the evening, back in Kandahar Airfield, and helped carry the coffin of Blake Williamson during the ramp ceremony onto the C-130 for his trip home, for his last trip home. And you listen to him talk. Matter of fact, like I said, there's no bravado. Matter of factly, huge compliments to Sergeant Darcy Tedford, who was a section commander, and about what a great mentor and what a great leader he was. Huge compliments to Master Corporal Jeremy LeBlanc, and what a great leader and what a lead by example kind of guy he was, and just kind of dished out kudos to everybody else but himself. It was just an interesting thing to sit and talk about. And to listen to that awesome Canadian son talk about the most extraordinary day, and one I believe deserves the Victoria Cross. So I would finish with that and say, thank you for participating, and let's all make sure we got folks out there wearing poppies. I was in the mall in Ottawa last couple of days, and a couple of places with a lot of people. And you know something, I was out at the Ottawa Senators game, and I was just doing my own straw poll. I would say not 1 in 20 are wearing a poppy. And I've worried about this since the pandemic struck, that pre-pandemic will have disappeared from our memory books and our storybooks and our history books. It'll only be the pandemic onwards. And this remembrance part is a part that can easily disappear if we don't actively work to keep it alive for all the good reasons that Gabby and I were talking about, and more besides. So thanks, folks. Have a great evening, and spend Remembrance Day at least a few minutes remembering and appreciating and thanking.